Hi friends, introducing Walter Fitzroy, otherwise known as Fuse. He's a 54-year-old bone cage fighting champion from the planet Salvo. Fuse is also the new legend in Apex Legends Season 8. In this video, I'll have a look at Fuse and give you all of the facts and tips that you need to know to help you understand how to use Fuse in Apex Legends Season 8. Now let's start by looking at Fuse and understanding his kit. I'll give you some tips as we go along on how to use his abilities and also how to win more games using Fuse in Apex Legends Season 8. So Fuse is an offensive legend, and he's known as the bombastic explosives expert. His passive ability is actually really useful. It's a launching device for grenades, thermites and arc stars. With his launcher, he can throw them faster and much further than any other legend. It's also a lot more accurate than any other legend, and you've definitely got a better chance of sticking your opponent with an arc star or landing damage with your thermite or grenade with this passive. To use it, you simply equip a grenade as you normally would do with any other legend, but instead of holding it in his hand, Fuse will put it into his launcher. And in case you're wondering, no, there isn't a way to make Fuse throw it with his hand. He will always use his launcher, but it's a good thing, I can assure you that. If you look at Fuse compared to Loba, both throwing an arc star, you can see how far and high Fuse can throw his compared to Loba. And this is the same for any other legend when compared to Fuse when throwing a grenade, or arc star, or thermite. One tip is that you should definitely carry more grenades as Fuse, and to help with this, he also has another passive that lets you stack 2 grenades, thermites or arc stars in one slot. It's similar to Watson's ability to carry 2 ultimate accelerants in one slot. I should add, you do have to stack the same types together, so if you were thinking you could mix an arc star and a thermite in one slot, you still can't do that, but it does allow you to carry, for example, 2 arc stars in one slot or 2 thermites in one slot. So it's definitely worth you carrying the grenades for your team as Fuse. And to be honest, as I'm still getting used to Fuse, I still have to remind myself that I'm able to pick up an extra throwable, just because I'm so used to having one slot with one grenade or one throwable in. And I'm sure it's the same for you, so just remind yourself, every time you're Fuse, you can actually pick up 2 grenades or arc stars or thermites per slot. In terms of how to aim with his launcher, each of the throwables has a different flight path. Hold your fire button as normal to aim, and you really want to be lining up the end of the trajectory with the object that you want to hit. So for example, for an arc star, where you want to stick it to an opponent, you line up the circle at the end of the flight path. You can see this little blue circle at the end of this curved line, and you want to aim that blue circle so it's actually sitting on the object or person that you want to hit with the arc star. For thermites and grenades, it's quite similar but with a different flight path. And generally with thermites or grenades, you more tend to aim for the opponent's feet, because you don't really want to hit them straight on and then the grenade to bounce off. So actually you want to aim a little bit lower than you would with an arc star, because you can't stick with a thermite or grenade, but if you land it on the ground and the opponent's within the vicinity, it's going to do decent damage. And with Fuse's launcher, you can do this from a greater distance. So that's how his passive works effectively with throwables. His tactical is next, and for his tactical, he's got the Knuckle Cluster. It's a cluster bomb essentially, that expels a burst of mini explosions that deal a maximum of 50 damage. It also has a 20-second cooldown time, which is relatively fast, so it's something you can use fairly often. You can also stick enemies with his tactical, but I would say once you stick it, it does 10 damage, but I find the burst after it, when it launches into those little clusters, if the opponent's moving, it tends not to do the remaining damage. So I find one effective way to conquer this is actually hit the ground in front of your opponent, because then it tends to burst up and hit them with all 50 max damage. And I find this to be a little bit more effective than actually sticking the opponent. And it also works quite nicely if you've got a squad of 3 in a confined area. You can really do some decent damage there. And if you find you've got a moving opponent, it's also quite a good idea to try and stick it in front of where the opponent's running towards, because by the time they get there, the cluster will have burst and it deals a decent amount of damage. And finally, talking about Fuse's ultimate, we have the Mother Load. So Fuse's ultimate is essentially a bombardment that creates a ring of fire. Its aim is measured with this green circle, so if you aim too far away it will go red and it won't actually let you fire. The fire range is actually about 200 meters, which is still fairly decent, so you don't need to be super close to use it. You also can't aim straight at your feet, but to be honest, you wouldn't really want to do that anyway, and when I talk about damage, you'll understand why. In terms of cooldown time, it has a 120-second cooldown time, which to be honest isn't too bad. If you look at the other legends, it's kind of about average. And in terms of damage, it does 35 damage initially if the player touches the fire, but then it progressively ticks up to 75 damage, so you can definitely do a lot of damage with it. And it's actually the second highest damage out of any ultimate, only behind Gibraltar's. I should say though, if you stay in the center of the fire ring it creates and don't touch the sides, it actually won't do any damage, but it does mean you're limited there and you can't actually move out because it's a full circle. So that's something you'll have to weigh up if you get stuck inside a Fuse ultimate. And if you are one of the legends with movement abilities, such as Aloba or Horizon, Octane, Wraith, any of those kind of legends, then you can actually use your ability to get out of that ring and not take any damage. So there are definitely some counters to when this ultimate gets deployed, so do keep that in mind. I will say though, you can't actually jump over it normally. Unless you're like on a hill above the ultimate, you really can't jump over it. It will still damage you if you try to jump through the flames. And one really great tip for this is that the Ring of Fire doesn't actually damage your teammates, so they can run through it if they want to fight a team inside the Ring of Fire. And likewise, if you're using it defensively, which I'll talk a bit more about in a second, then again, your teammates won't take any damage from your Ring of Fire. However, Fuse himself will take damage, so if you're Fuse and you've used your ultimate and you touch the flames, then it will actually damage you. So do just be careful of that. And if we think about a few tips or a few ways to use Fuse's ultimate effectively, there are a few options. The first option is to use it as a zoning tool to break up teams so you can finish them off easily. To do this, find your targets and fire your ultimate with the aim of getting the circle around the players and to separate the players by having maybe 1 or 2 inside the circle and perhaps 1 outside the circle. Like I said, your own teammates don't take damage, so they can push into the ultimate and finish off those isolated players. Another way to use the ultimate is actually to do it intending to use it for damage. And by this, I mean if you land the edge of the ring, that green circle, on top of your opponent, then as it lands, it will automatically do damage. So this is a way to use it as an offensive weapon. If you don't want it to just isolate players, you can use it to immediately inflict damage as it lands. I'm not going to lie, it is a bit hard to do, especially if your opponents are moving, but if you can land it, you'll do immediate damage, and it should really help you out. There are also a few other ways to use this ultimate. You can actually use it as a defensive tool or a repositioning tool. So if you think a team is pushing you or a team's quite close behind you and you want to move away from them, you can actually deploy it behind you, almost a bit like a barrier, and move away from it. And this will give you just a little bit of cover behind you, because obviously if the team chasing you pushes through the fire, then they're going to take quite a lot of damage. So it's actually quite a nice defensive tool to give you some cover to reposition. And it can also be used inside a building to stop a team pushing you inside a building. Again, I would say this is quite hard to do without taking damage yourself. Because of the way it fires up and then down. If you've got a building with a roof that isn't that high, it'll probably just hit the building and land right in front of you, probably dealing damage to yourself. But like I said, your teammates won't take damage from your own ultimate. So this could be quite a nice way to block off an entrance to keep your teammates safe. Another thing to note is that Wattson's ultimate does block both Fuse's tactical and ultimate, so do watch out for that. And try not to use it if you see your Wattson has deployed her ultimate. And along the same lines, you can actually combine Fuse's ultimate with other Legends ultimates. So for example, if you deployed a Fuse ultimate and threw a Caustic ultimate in there, along with a Horizon ultimate as well, you've got one really effective triple threat of ultimates. So there are definitely some nice combos you can do. And that's it, those are his abilities and how to use them. Overall, I would say Fuse is a really fun legend. He doesn't have any movement abilities, so try to think about that with your positioning and the way you attack squads. His ultimate and his tactical are quite offensive, so try and pick clever positions that allow you to use them without being in tricky situations when you then don't have a movement ability to get you out of it. And Fuse is also really good at breaking campers out of buildings. As you've heard from his tactical and passive, they really mean he can break down doors and deal a lot more damage and force people out of tight spaces compared to many other legends. And that's it, my first guide for Apex Legends Season 8 on the brand new legend, Fuse. I'll be doing more legend tutorial videos throughout Season 8, so feel free to let me know in the comments down below which legend you would like to see a video on. I know a few of you have let me know already, and I've got them on my list for sure. For now though, don't forget to hit the big red subscribe button down below if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you later. By the way, did you know I stream every Saturday at around 7 PM UK time? Most of these I'll actually be playing with anyone that wants to play with me, so you can actually join in with me and we can play some Apex Legends together. So come join me for my next stream on Saturday. I look forward to seeing you there.